What is up, everybody? Before we get into today's episode of It Takes Balls, I just wanted to share a little exciting tidbit. My wife and I wrote a children's book titled What's Wrong with Billy's Balls? What's Wrong with Billy's Balls uses golf as a euphemism for checking for testicular cancer and for asking for help when you believe that it's needed. We hope that this book will open up the conversation for survivors with their sons, but the story also applies to everybody in general. You can pick up What's Wrong with Billy's Balls on Amazon or on testiscancer.org. It's important to note, though, that proceeds from the book, no matter where it's sold, benefit the organization. However, purchasing it on testiscancer.org benefits the organization a little bit more. And while you're on testiscancer.org, make sure you pick up some of these cool shirts. We have a lot of educational materials that you can distribute in your community or show your support for your loved one or just your pride as a survivor. So again, What's Wrong with Billy's Balls, available now. Thank you guys so much. Let's get into today's episode. It Takes Balls is brought to you by our new sponsor, D's Nuts. Yes, you heard that right. If you've never heard of them, check them out at grabdsnuts.com. But warning, these are not your grandparents' peanuts. D's Nuts is really shaking up the nut game. They're gourmet, fun, and packed with flavor. Whether you're a fan of savory flavors like ranch, sriracha, or hot cheddar, spicy like ghost pepper, or if you have a sweet tooth like me, you like the banana pudding. D's Nuts has something for everyone. But D's Nuts aren't just about taste, they're about making a difference. For every bag, can, or piece of D's Nuts merch purchased using the coupon code NUTCHECK on grabdsnuts.com, you can save 10%, and another 10% gets donated towards supporting Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. So the next time you're craving a snack that's both delicious and meaningful, reach for D's Nuts. Because when it comes to supporting Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation, it takes balls and it takes D's Nuts. Available at grabdsnuts.com, Amazon, and Walmart locations nationwide. D's Nuts, a delicious, healthy snack in a variety of fun flavors and making a difference one nut at a time. The stories shared on It Takes Balls are unique to the individual sharing. Always speak with your trusted medical provider for treatment options specific to you. Welcome back to It Takes Balls, presented by Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation. Today I'm joined by a survivor from Wisconsin. I'm joined by Seth Camp. Seth, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Before we get into your testicular cancer story, tell me a little bit about who you are.
I'm in Onalaska, Wisconsin, like you said, and I have 2 kids, 2 boys, and a wife. I work for Apple through the Mac guys here as an Apple technician.
Nice. All right, so let's talk about your testicular cancer story, because I know you were diagnosed when you were 43.
Correct. That was almost a year ago. On the 2nd of August. I had just turned 43. I not one to go to the doctor a lot. So it was my first blood draw ever, my first surgery ever. So it was quite terrifying.
What led you to go to the doctor, having not been somebody who regularly went?
So I had pain in my left testicle for quite a few years. My doctor and I had kind of determined that it was a varicocele. And then for some reason, after we had gotten back from Scotland last year on our vacation, it seemed different. My left testicle just got really firm and a lot larger. And then I had a lump or 2 that I felt on there. So I thought I have to have this checked out.
So in those years that you had been feeling something and you determined the varicocele with your doctor, did you have an ultrasound at all?
I did not. That was kind of my self-diagnosis, and then I went to my doctor, and they kind of agreed that is what it felt like.
And there were no, like, palpable, is that the word? I don't know, but there was no lump you could feel for those years?
No, I didn't feel any lumps until last year.
Yeah, mine was kind of the same way. Like mine was, I had pain and a slight increase in size for what I chalk up to be a couple of years. And it wasn't until I finally went that, like you, I had it discovered. So yeah, it's good to see I'm not the only one that waited that long. But
well, and there was some manageable pain for a long time, but then it just got worse and worse and worse. I mean, I couldn't even mow the lawn without doubling over in pain.
Oh, wow. All right. So when you when you finally went to be seen for these lumps, tell me about that process.
It's funny because my wife had actually gone to our doctor a week before and told her what I was coming in for. And she kind of dismissed it, saying, oh, he's too old for that. And then the day that I had the appointment and she did her examination, she knew, I think, because the atmosphere changed so quickly. And she said, yeah, you need to go for an ultrasound.
Yeah. So then when you went to the ultrasound, what was that like for you?
So the ultrasound tech doesn't really divulge a lot of information or anything, which I think they're trained to do. But it was easier than I thought. I was kind of apprehensive about that, but it wasn't anything major. But my wife was there. And then on my chart that night was when I saw the results. And when it says malignancy, and it talked about a tumor or a mass being more than 2/3 of my testicle, I thought, yep, I know what this is.
So when you get that my chart result and you're with your wife and you have your two kids, what are those emotions?
My heart sank. I honestly, being so terrified about anything medical, that was huge for me. I thought, what do I have in store? I called my doctor. She saw the results and she said, well, you're most likely have surgery. And she said, this is curable. You can get through this. So she was very encouraging.
How old are your sons?
I have a 21-year-old and a 15-year-old.
Gotcha. Okay. So are they, because they're kind of in that prime age too, and we know that from Johns Hopkins that it's about 2 to 4 times increased risk that they could potentially get it. So what's it like with them now?
Right. So I read so much stuff online about different people finding out about their testicular cancer and some guys who took pregnancy tests. So my boys, I've told them to check regularly, and in their Christmas stockings, they get pregnancy tests now. So I know it's not foolproof, but hey, it's something.
Stocking stuffer. Yeah, that's good.
Yep.
So what were the next steps? So you got the my chart result. Then what was it like after that?
So that ultrasound and my chart result was on a Wednesday, and then Friday evening, a doctor called, and he was very adamant about getting it taken care of right away. He wanted me to do labs the next day, surgery on Monday. And I thought, well, I need like a week to plan for work and everything. And he said, no, you need to go in on Monday. He said, this stuff is very, very advanced and can happen very quickly. So that Monday I was in the operating room.
And what was the orchiectomy like for you?
Being my first surgery too was very weird. It is literally like just going to sleep and then you wake up and it's been hours later or whatever. Painful. It wasn't as much pain as I expected, but there was definitely pain. I didn't expect all of the gauze and everything and how they like compact everything and try to keep it all snug. And I didn't expect everything to look blue and purple, and that was terrifying.
Yeah. Did they have you count backwards or anything? Do you remember that before your surgery?
I do remember that. They said to count to 10, and I think I got to maybe 2, and I was out.
Jeez. All right. So I know you were stage 2A, right?
Yeah.
So after you got your pathology back, what did the picture look like for you there?
Well, the pathology was showing a lot of nothing in the lymphovascular area, nothing beyond the testicle itself. So I was kind of hopeful for that. And then when I had my follow-up appointment, they said they want to do a CT scan. And so I had that done. And at that point, that's when they saw a lymph node that was not shaped quite right and enlarged. And that was in my retroperitoneal cavity. So they had to move on to chemo after that.
Yeah. What do you remember the size of it?
I don't remember the size on that. I know it was slightly over what the normal size is. So they were concerned about it.
Yeah. So the decision to do chemo, talk to me about that.
So I never was offered anything like RPLND or anything like that. I knew about the surgery because I'd read so much about it, but it was basically, this is the standard of care for the chemo. You get BEP. And I had read things about bleomycin that scared me. So I thought, I think I want to just do the EP. and the doctor said I'd really encouraged to do the BEP. So that was the plan we set out right from the beginning, and getting a port, which for somebody who doesn't like medical things and needles and all that, a port made more sense because they could do all my blood draws and everything from that. So
Yeah, my personal opinion is that the port is like the easiest part of the entire journey. I don't know how you feel about it, but when people in our support group will be like, I got to get a port, like, what is that like? I'm like, that's going to be the least of your worries.
right. It honestly is. I mean, I didn't like it at the time, and I had learned to take a Xanax before I go in to have any procedures done or anything, just to calm my nerves. And I remember going in, it was my first day of chemo, and they were going to do the port first. And they knew about my whole fear of everything. So I had the Xanax in me, and they gave me Versed, I think was what they did. And I still felt the needles going in. Didn't hurt, just the pressure. And I remember coming out of that when the port was in, looking at my wife saying, I felt everything. And I was so mad.
So this was the placement of the port or accessing it for chemo?
The placement of the port.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Speaking of the port, when you had your chemo, did they leave you accessed all week, or did they re-access you every day?
They left me accessed all week.
Yeah, same. That's nice. You just have to sleep in.
Yeah. It honestly was really nice because they could do everything through that.
Yeah. Talk to me about chemo. I mean, losing your hair, any notable events that you had from chemo?
I would say the most notable with like losing hair, it honestly was, I think, right before the second round. I went to put product in my hair and it was just coming out in clumps. Like, I've heard people talk about losing their hair with chemo, but it's so different when you actually experience it, because it's not like you feel the pull, it just comes out. Before that, I had the full week of the BEP, and then that following Monday, just the bleomycin. After that second round of bleomycin, I ended up in the ER the next day. I felt rough that day. And they did so many tests on me and came back and said, well, I'm sorry, you're going through chemo. That's what you're experiencing. So I just kind of had to suck it up and keep going.
So what was the symptoms that led you to the ER?
I felt like I couldn't move. We were actually going in for an endocrinology appointment because I had procrastinated my whole life with going into the doctor. We also found out when I had cancer that I was also diabetic. So I needed to get that under control because chemo can also raise your blood sugar. So they wanted me to start getting that managed. So I was going in for that, but my wife dropped me off at the door and I could barely walk in. I felt horrible, like it was just not going to function. So they said, go straight to the ER.
Interesting. Okay. Talk more about being a diabetic with chemo. I think you're the first I've talked to with that specific scenario, but I'm sure you're not the only one. So any insight that you can share would be great.
Yeah, if you can get it managed before you go into chemo, that's going to be the best option. Because starting chemo and trying to get it managed wasn't necessarily the easiest. I mean, there's been a point when I've been on 3 different shots for that, trying to just get it down, because the chemo will shoot your numbers way up. So that was very interesting. And it was funny because there was, right after my first week of chemo, I lost 30 pounds. And for me, I thought, oh, that's awesome. Lose 30 pounds in a week. And they're like, no, that's bad. So they want more balance. So it was interesting.
Yeah. Did they have to alter the chemo regimen at all, or the shots just worked in conjunction with it?
They worked in conjunction. They didn't really alter anything. They had told me from the beginning, even if my numbers got low and I needed like a Neupogen shot or anything to boost my immunity, they said with testicular cancer, we really don't stop the chemo. You just kind of have to keep going through the misery. So I had been told that from the beginning and expected that.
Interesting. So you said if your numbers got too low, did you not have the shot for the boosting the white blood cells?
I did not. I
Interesting.
got pretty low and got close, but I did not have to have one.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Every week I had one that they put on my arm, and it caused some of the worst bone pain I've ever had in my hips.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah. So going through chemo, I mean, what was it like with your wife and your kids? I mean, your kids obviously are grown enough to kind of be self-sufficient, but what was that support system like for you?
Everybody was amazing. There were so many people, friends and family, that wanted to come sit with me, be my chemo buddy. Each round got worse with chemo. I mean, it just felt worse and worse and worse. And I can look back at pictures of myself and it looks like I'm dying, like the life is being sucked out of me. And that last round, I just looked horrible. But everybody was pretty supportive. I mean, we had meals dropped off and had a huge support system. So I'm very thankful for that.
That's great. And again, about your kids. So, I mean, do you know if they're doing their self-exams other than the pregnancy test, or are they being seen more closely by the doctor or anything like that?
They say they are doing their self-exams, so I'm going to trust that they are. But they do regular physicals too, so.
That's great. And then since chemo, what has life been like for you? I know you mentioned some side effects that you have, and how is that impacting you these days?
Yeah, so I didn't have any of the side effects right away, so I was kind of not expecting them. And they talk about side effects, but you never really think about them until you start to feel them, other than the nauseousness and things like that during the chemo. The neuropathy started probably a month after. That got pretty bad. I mean, my feet would ache and they're numb. My fingers would get a little numb, which is hard with my job because I'm working on like iPhones and MacBooks and little stuff, and that was difficult. And then my hearing, it seemed like just one day I couldn't hear everything out of my left ear. So now I have a hearing aid in that ear to compensate for everything I've lost there. But the neuropathy is getting better. And I know I've read from a lot of guys that it's about a year after that their neuropathy starts getting a lot better.
Gotcha. Yeah. What was it like with work? You mentioned working on the small phones and stuff. Was that pretty frustrating, or just something you learned to deal with?
It was frustrating during the chemo and with the diabetes and everything. The vision was the worst. I would go in for a couple hours. My wife would take me in when I would feel okay enough to go in and try to work on something. And I remember there was one phone I was working on and I just could not see where to put the tiny little screw, anything. So I had to have her come over, and she was shocked that I work on that all day, every day anyway, because it was so tiny. But I said, I literally can't see anything. So can you put this screw right here? And afterwards, we started getting medication to help with the neuropathy right away. And it wasn't as bad as in my hands as it was in my feet. So it hasn't been horrible.
What about
managed.
being in the north? Like, I'm kind of in a more mild climate in Virginia, but I notice in the cold, like my fingers start to feel a little bit more, I don't know, neuropathic. Is that the word? But is it worse for you in the winter?
You know, I don't know that it was any worse during the winter than any other time. Maybe it's just because I was getting it managed too fairly quickly when I started feeling it. Any appointment I had, they would constantly ask, have you felt any symptoms? Is there anything new? Neuropathy? Constantly asking me about neuropathy. So I think they expected it.
Yeah. So you mentioned it's been almost a year. This episode's going to come out on August 1st, and I think you said August 2nd. So over the last year, what has life been like?
It's been interesting. I will say one of the biggest things for me was, and I think everybody with cancer probably feels, there's a loneliness. I felt like, especially with mine, because I just didn't have anybody to talk to. I knew no one that had testicular cancer. And not to diminish other cancer or anything, but like breast cancer is everywhere. There's walks for them and all this stuff. And I didn't have anybody to talk to. So that was very hard. I just wanted somebody to understand exactly what I was going through. That was the most difficult part, even though I had a great support system. Um, and the more I get out from the chemo and all of that, the better it gets. So that's, I think, probably March was a good turning point for me. I started to feel better. My wife could see that I was feeling better, and she said, you just seemed a lot happier and more energetic. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Yeah, that's great that it's getting better. Have you talked to Brian Vassal at all? He's a friend of TCAF, and he's in his 40s as well.
I have not, but I heard about him.
Yeah, he's in, let's see, you're in Wisconsin, so I think he's in Michigan. So
Okay.
you're kind of neighbors a little bit.
Yep.
All right. So what about like follow-ups? How have your follow-ups been?
They've been pretty easy. There's points where I think maybe I should have kept my port because it would have been easier to access for the CT scans and the blood work, but it's honestly not bad. Again, I take a Xanax to help me before I go in. And my wife's usually always there. And scanxiety is definitely a real thing. I get very nervous leading up to it all the time, thinking they're going to find something, or I've had this pain lately, so what is that? It's always in the back of your mind.
Yeah,
with any pain.
Definitely, for sure. Do you have any advice for anybody who may have, like, if they've just been diagnosed, like, what would you tell them?
So I actually just had the opportunity through high school. My son is in show choir, and my wife and I are co-presidents of our parent support group. So somebody introduced me to a 17-year-old kid who just found out he had testicular cancer, and he had waited quite a few months and had enlargement and everything. So I was so excited to be able to mentor somebody. So I kind of just let him talk. Thankfully, he was open about everything. I think that's the biggest thing, is to have somebody to talk to, whether it's a therapist or somebody that's been through it. That is huge, to be able to talk through it and express your feelings, and don't be nervous about the area that you're talking about, because anybody that thinks about, oh, I don't want to talk about my testicles, well, that's what's going on with you. So talk about it.
Yeah, that's absolutely great advice. Are you coming to the conference in San Diego this September?
I am not. I wish I was.
No. All right. A later year you'll have to come, because it is a lot of that,
Yeah.
like having people to talk to who have been through it. So I'd recommend that to anybody who is going through it. I want to talk about, has testosterone been an issue for you at all? I know, like, it kind of naturally dips as you get older, and then having a testicle removed. Have you noticed any changes in yourself, or have you been looked at for anything with testosterone?
So I actually just started that process. Of course, I never had a blood draw before, so I never had it tested. My assumption is I've always been lower. But I just had that tested a month ago, and I was at like 200. So definitely lower. I know thanks to this podcast, I've learned that in younger people, it's easy for them to compensate with the other testicle and kicking in with testosterone and all the hormones and everything. But when you're older, that's different. So I am going to start the process of seeing if I can get some sort of supplement on that.
Great. Do you feel do you feel fatigued or anything now? Like more fatigued now after your testicle removed? Yeah,
I do. Yeah, for sure.
And I know you mentioned brain fog as a side effect too. I mean, I think that can be, I'm not a doctor, but I think testosterone can be related to that as well.
Yeah, from what I know, there's so much linked to testosterone that I didn't even realize. So for sure, it wouldn't surprise me. I know during chemo, brain fog was ridiculous.
Do you still feel like you deal with it at all?
Not as much as I did. No.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great to hear. Is there anything else that you want to mention that I didn't ask about?
I don't think so. I mean, for me, my biggest thing is getting people to check and to get checked out, because I know how terrified I was of everything, and I still don't like the needles and all of that. I actually have a syndrome vasovagal response to stress. Even during my surgery, the doctor told my wife that I had kind of had an episode twice during the surgery, which is odd because I'm already out. So how do I pass out during surgery? But it is a real thing, but you have to push through it, because the alternative is so much worse. I mean, mine could have been a lot worse than just one lymph node. So thankfully I went in, but always, if something is different, get it checked.
Absolutely. Yep. Early detection is going to lead to a better prognosis.
Yeah.
Are you on social media anywhere people could reach out to you if they want to talk to you? Like if Brian Vassal, who's we mentioned, wants to connect?
Yep. I am on Facebook. That's typically where I go, is Facebook.
Awesome. Seth, thank you so much for being on It Takes Balls.
Thank you so much.
For more information and resources for your testicular cancer journey, visit testicularcancerawarenessfoundation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Testis Cancer. We're on Facebook at Testicular Cancer Awareness Foundation.